Dracula is a novel by Bram Stoker, first published in 1897. It is a good read, and nowadays it's also one of the main sources about vampires because it describes a lot of the typical traits and weaknesses of our blood-sucking immortals. Bram Stoker didn't invent vampires, the folklore about them is much older. But with Count Dracula he invented the most famous representative of its kind. Or did he? You see, there is a historical figure who was called Dracula. Vlad III Dracula. He was the ruler of Wallachia, a country situated in modern-day Romania. And his fancy surname, Dracula, has an interesting meaning. It translates to son of dragon. His father, Vlad Dracul, meaning Vlad the Dragon, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, hence the name. So, the name of the most famous vampire actually means son of dragon. But is Vlad III the inspiration for our famous Count? He does have an interesting history. He was actually ruler of Wallachia 3 times, and his first rule during 1448 lasted only about 2 months before he was overthrown. It was a turbulent time, and a lot of neighboring powers were in constant conflict. During his first rule, Vlad Dracula was supported by the Ottoman Empire, but when he invaded Wallachia again to establish his second rule in 1456, he was backed by Hungary, who were fighting the Ottomans, his former allies. During his second reign, Vlad waged war against the Saxons in Transylvania, before he had to flee from the Ottomans in 1462, which led to his imprisonment by the Saxons. And in 1475 they released and supported him to conquer Wallachia once again, before Vlad Dracula was finally killed in a battle against the Ottomans in 1477. So there was a lot of war during his lifetime, a lot of switching sides and a lot of coming back after being defeated. Vlad was also known for his cruelty, and he gained the nickname Sepesh, which translates to impaler, because he made an habit out of impaling captured soldiers and apparently even children. His ruthless brutality was so infamous that stories about Vlad spread over Europe. The cruel tyrant of Wallachia became a famous figure, and centuries later some of these stories reached Bram Stoker. You might be tempted to conclude that Vlad Sepesh Dracula really is the inspiration for Count Dracula. Besides the name, the cruel behavior and his constant comebacks could easily be connected to vampire folklore. But in fact, Bram Stoker was the first to draw that connection. Folk tales about Vlad Dracula described him as a brutal tyrant, but they didn't give him any supernatural powers. And while Bram Stoker certainly heard of Vlad's name, it is not clear how much he knew about the historical figure. In his working papers for the novel, there is no mention of Vlad Sepesh, and the backstory of Count Dracula doesn't align with history. In the end, there is a connection between Dracula and Dracula, but was Vlad Sepesh the inspiration for our famous Count? Probably not. And that leaves us with one important question. What is a Tohou? Have you ever heard this song before? I bet the answer is yes. In case you don't know, the song is called Megalovania from the game Undertale, and it is immensely popular. So popular that I have another question to all of you who heard the song before. Have you heard it in-game first? I bet the answer is no. At least that's how it was for me. I played Undertale this year in 2024 for the first time, but I have encountered the song many times before. It's even in Smash. And I assume that most people have heard it somewhere, but just a small percentage of them actually experienced it in Undertale first. Megalovania is so iconic that it surpasses the popularity of the game it appears in. That's not to say that Undertale is not well known. It is an indie game and it was made by mostly one person, nevertheless it managed to become one of the most remarkable phenomenons in gaming of the last decade. There's even a video from Super Eyepatch Wolf about the fan culture of Undertale and the crazy proportions it reached. I can recommend it if you haven't watched it. However, if you haven't played Undertale yet, then don't watch any videos about it. Undertale is best experienced going in with as little knowledge as possible. You can be assured that it is a great experience, so go play it, but don't gather any information on it beforehand. That's the reason I'm showing you Smash Brothers footage right now. I couldn't bring myself to possibly spoil someone. I still wanted to bring up Megalovania's massive popularity because there is a striking parallel to today's topic. So let's repeat the quiz once more. Have you heard this song before? I bet the answer is yes again, and I bet most of you have not experienced it in-game. It might be an even more extreme example than Megalovania. This song is called... No, that's a lie. It is not called Death Waltz, even though it is still often referred to as Death Waltz, because for some reason it was uploaded under that name and gained popularity as the Impossible Piano Song. This is how I first came into contact with it, all the way back in the early 2010s, when a friend of mine showed me this impossible piano piece. Back then I didn't know that Death Waltz was the wrong name, but since it was so mesmerizing, I wanted to hear it again, and after searching for it, I stumbled upon the real version. And that's how my personal story with the Touhou series began. N Owen was her from Touhou 6, embodiment of Scarlet Devil. This was my first touchpoint with the Touhou Project, which I didn't even know existed back then. But I soon researched where this unusual song came from and found videos from the game. I looked at it for a couple of minutes, decided that it was one of those weird bullet hell games and immediately lost all interest. But not in N Owen was her, because it wasn't just a strangely captivating song, it was also widespread over the internet, even to this day. Just like Megalovania, it is unfathomably popular, and because of that it was used in lots and lots of popular meme videos of that time. The most famous is probably this one, but there were many more. And so, even though I discarded the thought of playing a Touhou game, I was still connected to the series by its music. And soon it wasn't just N Owen was her. The song is called Night of Nights, also referred to as Night of Nights and sometimes even Night of Nights, because apparently with Touhou music you can never have just one accepted name. What you're hearing right now is not in-game music, but a very popular remix by Beat Mario of the Cool and Create group. They worked on tons of Touhou remixes. The original version is called Flowering Night and it appears in Touhou 9, Phantasmagoria of Flower View. Get used to these fancy names, they all sound like this. As I stated in my last video, I'm not a musician, but I can totally see why this would inspire you to create remixes with it. Just like N Owen was her, Night of Nights was used in lots of fan-created videos and memes. I could show you a lot, but here's just one personal favorite of mine, because I'm also a huge Persona fan. But if I remember correctly, the first time I heard Night of Nights was while watching a let's play of a game called I Wanna Kill the Guy. It features the song in one of its most famous moments. Considering that this boss fight is basically a little rhythm game, you can easily say that Night of Nights is the actual enemy here. It is certainly the star of this section. In case you're wondering what's on the screen right now, the game I Wanna Kill the Guy is not an officially released and published title, but a fan game created by the new geezer. It is obviously inspired by I Wanna Be the Guy by Michael K. and O'Reilly. This one is massively influential and sparked a wave of similar titles like I Wanna Be the Boshi or even Battle Kid and the Fortress of Peril. These games are designed to be really hard and comically unfair. They are sometimes referred to as anti-platformer because they throw a lot of design principles out of the window to create experiences that are frustratingly difficult but also weirdly funny. Another branch of these games was kicked off with Kaizo Mario World, a Super Mario World ROM hack by T. Takamoto, and just like I Wanna Be the Guy, it offers a unique challenge that you can hardly find in other games. They are a fascinating niche in gaming, and back then I watched a lot of let's plays about them. I even tried out I Wanna Be the Guy myself, but gave up on the Dracula boss fight. It should take a decade before I finally beat that game.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world! What is a man?
And for this video I had to play it again. So in case you're under the impression I'm not serious about these videos, then just reflect on the fact that I played I Wanna Be the Guy again just so I could capture this footage of me defeating Dracula. I can't even tell you how many deaths it took me to get to this point, because I lost count. So never doubt me again. Anyway, this fight is a prime example on how openly these games borrow assets from other titles. That leads us back to Night of Nights in I Wanna Kill the Guy, and I think it's rather impressive that from all the music in gaming that could have been selected, it was Night of Nights that was chosen for this fight. You can say about Touhou whatever you want, but its music sure is popular. But before we move on with my story about Touhou, there is more to unpack here, so let's do a little side quest. Since this is a fan game, there are more references here. For example, have you seen this boss character before? Because when I watched it back then, I recognized her immediately. Her appearance is based on Curly Brace from Cave Story. That's another noteworthy and very inspirational game, because Cave Story was developed by just one person. Daisuke Amaya created this sprawling action-adventure with its cool weapon system, its surprisingly deep story, and so many other great features. It is as indie as it gets, but it easily surpasses a lot of titles it draws inspiration from. But I guess that's a story for another day. It's cool to see Cave Story and Touhou Project combined here, but I Wanna Kill the Guy added another reference here that I highly appreciate. Listen. Haven't you heard these voices before? That's right, it's Space Channel 5 again. If you watched my last video, this shouldn't be a surprise, because I Wanna Kill the Guy mirrors the gameplay of Space Channel 5 in this fight. It's the good old call and response style you can find in a lot of rhythm games. If you want to know more about it, then here's the link. And to those who have seen my last video, have you played Space Channel 5 yet? Because I really clearly and heavily recommended it. If I couldn't convince you last time, then let me try it one more time. You see that guy in the background? You wanna know his name? It's Space Michael. I have no idea who he's supposed to be. What does all of this have to do with Touhou, you ask? Well, that was just one example on how deeply the music of Touhou was entangled in the fan and video game culture of its time. There are many more, and there is even one video that rivals the popularity of N Owen Was Her and Megalovania. Have you ever seen Bad Apple before? Maybe you saw one of its seemingly endless variations instead. This song and video are truly iconic. In my case it's rather funny, because the first time I saw the original was this year, but I've seen different versions many times over the course of the last decade. I didn't even know it was related to Touhou, I just knew it as the weird black and white video with the apple. Once again, what you're hearing right now is not from the in-game soundtrack, but a fan-created version. The original is from Touhou 4 Lotus Land Story and sounds like this. Wow, that's a banger. I love chiptunes like that. Gives me some Mega Man vibes. N Owen Was Her, Flowering Night and Bad Apple. These are the biggest examples of the vast popularity of Touhou music. They are the ones I met the most, but there is so much more. I remember that many years ago a friend of mine sent me a playlist called Touhou Bossa Nova Collection 2, which, as the name suggests, contains bossa nova versions of Touhou soundtracks. She didn't even know that it was from a video game, let alone what Touhou is, she just liked the music. And look how many songs there are! Where do all these versions come from? And while researching this video I found an interesting album, Touhou Eurobeat. That sounds like it was specifically made for me. I love Eurobeat. But get this. Volume 24? There are 23 other Touhou Eurobeat albums? Oh, that's it. My music taste is officially dead. I know what I'll be listening to for the rest of the year. I could go on with more examples, but I think I made my point. Isn't this all kind of surprising or even shocking? There's this video game series of weird bullet hell games that you probably never played and maybe didn't even know existed. But its music is so widespread over the internet and there are thousands of fan-made remixes, or even more than that. And we're not talking about the Super Mario franchise or Final Fantasy here, but Touhou. How is that possible? What even is Touhou? Maybe it is the music. Could it be that the Touhou Project isn't really about video games, but rather a music project that uses games to promote their songs? That was a theory I had, but it soon was shattered when I encountered another aspect of the Touhou series that is immensely popular. After researching the game that was behind N Owen Was Her, I didn't put any more thoughts into Touhou as a video game series. I knew it existed and I knew some of its popular songs, but I didn't engage with its games in any way. That changed in 2016 when I watched a video of my favorite YouTube channel back then.
Hey, what's going on, man? Come on in. You ready to play?
This is turning into a YouTube nostalgia video, but I can't say I'm unhappy with it. Anyway, this is Friday Night Fisticuffs, a video series by Super Best Friends Play in which they showcase fighting games. And in this episode they played...
We're going in. It's the 12.3 Touhou Project, Seito Sensoku, or whatever the fuck this one's called.
And I was like, huh? Isn't that the Bullet Hell series with the good music? How are there 12 of them? I mean, 12.3? But surprisingly, one of the Super Best Friends knew Touhou as well, but not because of its music.
So, oh, I know these girls from Salty Bet, yeah.
Oh, I know these girls from not Melty Blood, Salty Bet. That's a good quote, Pat. And it's quite accurate. Not because they are from Salty Bet, they are from Touhou. Salty Bet is a topic I'll not get into here, but if you're into really weird fighting game stuff, the Super Best Friends have videos on that. Oh, Casino Night Zone. Nevertheless, this quote captures the essence of another really famous part of Touhou, its characters. Because it's not just the music, the characters are also extremely popular and widespread. Have you seen her somewhere before? Or her? What about her? That's the Shrine Maiden Reimu Hakurai, one of the main protagonists of the series and Touhou's main poster girl. She's widely popular and referenced in a lot of media and the most likely Touhou character that you might have seen before. I've met her and many others before playing a Touhou game myself, but didn't know where she came from. This rabbit hole is similarly structured as the Touhou music. On the upper level you'll encounter a lot of videos featuring Touhou characters. Some meme content and a surprising amount of well-animated music videos. And I mean really well-animated. Look at this! How in the Scarlet Devil's name is this so good? And that's just the tiniest particle of the tip of the iceberg. You'll be surprised what you'll find if you dig deeper. Like one full-fledged anime series. It's called Touhou Memories of Phantasm, and despite looking this great, it is not made by an animation studio, but by fans. It is an unlicensed series written, animated and voice acted by fans, driven by their passion for Touhou. And sorry, did I say one anime series? I meant 3. And there is more, like fan-created short films, manga, fumos that are basically Touhou-specific plushies. There's a card game. The Touhou fanbase has so much to offer and it's a challenge to even get a rough overview. But once again I have to ask, what is going on here? How is there so much fan content about these characters? Touhou is not Donkey Kong, you can't just expect that every seasoned gamer knows what it is. How many fan-created manga are there for Donkey Kong? Definitely less than for Touhou, because when looking at the most important convention for fan-created manga, the Comiket in Japan, then you will find out that during the 2010s, Touhou Project was by far the most popular series that fans created works for, beating out basically every popular manga and anime of its time. And even today it's still one of the more relevant names. It ranked number 7 on the Comiket number 103, which took place in December 2023, so it lost its dominant lead, but it is still one of the top dogs of that scene. One reason for this puzzling popularity is the fact that the rights holder of the Touhou Project is rather supportive towards fan creations. There are some guidelines, but they basically allow almost all fan creations, and the writers, artists, musicians and so on don't have to live in constant fear that they'll get sued. Compare that to fan games from Nintendo titles. Speaking of fan games, and yes, I'm finally talking about video games again. The creator-friendly guidelines led to a sprawling landscape of many unofficial Touhou games, spanning lots of genres. Of course they did. At this point, is anybody really surprised? The most notable for me is Lunar Nights, because a couple of years ago it was recommended to me by a friend. He described it as a game like Symphony of the Night, where you play a weird girl that can stop time. No mention of Touhou, because he didn't know anything about it. I didn't play Lunar Nights back then because of unrelated reasons, but since I am very much into cool Metroidvanias, there might be a story about it in the future. However, like with everything else, Lunar Nights is just one of many other Touhou Metroidvanias. And if you are into platformers, RPGs, action RPGs, racing, strategy, basically if you are into any video games at all, the Touhou fanbase got you covered. Look at this Wikipedia list of Touhou fan games. It just doesn't end. So at this point, what else is there to talk about? Maybe the original series itself. Doesn't all of that make you curious about what lies at the heart of all these fan creations? It took me many years, but the urge to find out what these Touhou games actually are and why they summoned this dedicated fan base. It got stronger and stronger. And after playing Crypt of the Necrodancer and listening to its soundtrack, I somehow stumbled over N Owen Was Her again. I knew what I had to do. And now I'm able to present you an answer. Touhou. The story of the Touhou Project starts with a noteworthy fun fact. To my knowledge, it is the only video game series that released its first entry on the same day as the second. Touhou 1 Highly Responsive to Prayers and Touhou 2 Story of Eastern Wonderland were both released in August in 1997. And they are quite different. While Touhou 2 is one of those weird bullet hell games, as my former self would have called it, Touhou 1 is a different beast. It's actually hard to describe. You control the character at the bottom and want to push the ball into various obstacles or even boss characters. It has some Breakout vibes, but combines it with action elements. There are even brutal bullet patterns you have to avoid. Honestly, it looks really interesting. If you want to play it, or the second one, then I have bad news for you. They were originally released for the PC-98, a computer that was exclusively sold in Japan. That's quite the entry barrier, and even today it's not easy to find a way to play them. This factor, that must have dramatically limited sales, was paired with the hurdles to actually get hold of a copy, because it was released during the Comiket number 52. The Comiket is the same convention that was utterly dominated by the Touhou Project in the 2010s, so Touhou had always been connected to fan culture. But the first two titles were only available for sale on that convention. They were not published to stores or anywhere else. You can't get more indie than that. And it resulted in extreme sales numbers. Both games combined were sold 80 times. Which is great if your game was only sold during a convention, but it raises the question how these numbers could possibly justify continuing the series. But that's not what mattered for Touhou's creator Sun, because these games were solely driven by passion. This guy is a real hero. Despite studying at the university, he developed the games all by himself. The design, programming, the music and the graphics, they are all from him. And he wasn't done with 2 games. At the next Comiket in December 1997, not even half a year later, he released the next entry, Touhou 3 Phantasmagoria of Dimensional Dream. And at the next two conventions, part 4 and 5 followed. Like the first two games, they were developed for the PC-98 and the new ones followed the style of the second game, meaning they were all bullet hell shooters, or danmaku as the genre is called in Japanese. And just like that, in the span of roughly 2 years, the Touhou Project became a series spanning 5 games. If the story ended here, it would already be worth telling, but Zun had more in store for us. Although after Touhou 5, it looked like the series had come to an end. In 1998, Zun graduated from university and joined the video game company Taito. Allegedly, he showed the Touhou games during his job interview and was immediately offered a position. This could have been the beginning of an amazing career in the corporate world of the video game industry, but apparently Zun was not enjoying it. He did contribute to a couple of games, but he soon returned to his indie ways. And thus, in August 2002, at the Comiket 62, Touhou 6 Embodiment of Scarlet Devil was released. It's a big step from Touhou 5, first and foremost because it was not developed for a specific hardware but for Windows systems, making it much more accessible and in turn leading to many more sales. While the first 5 games were well received, they were limited to the audience of the Comiket, but Touhou 6 marks the point where the series became available outside of the convention. Since it was also visually appealing, had great sound quality and made improvements to the game design, it became some sort of sleeper hit. And as the series progressed and produced one high-quality title after the other, it established itself as one of the essential danmaku series. The games were released by Team Shanghai Alice, but despite being called a team, it's still just Zun. Even today, he is creating these games alone, and for each new title he overhauls the game engine or creates a brand new one. That's enabled the series to feature a lot of innovation that lets each title stand out. For example, in Touhou 8 Imperishable Night, you don't just control one character but a team of 2 and you can switch the characters on the fly. And in Touhou 9 Phantasmagoria of Flower View, you play in a split-screen mode and battle characters on the other screen. And Zun is still out there designing, programming and composing. Touhou 19 Unfinished Dream of All Living Ghosts was released in August 2023. 19 entries in one series is nothing to sneeze at, but in reality there are more official Touhou games. There's stuff like Touhou 12.3 Hizo Tenzoku that we saw earlier. It's a fighting game spin-off developed by Twilight Frontier in cooperation with Zun. There are 13 of these spin-off games that all have decimals in their number. It's mostly fighters, but also some variations on the shooter genre sprinkled in, like Touhou 12.5 Double Spoiler, in which you have to take photographs of enemies while dodging their bullets. That brings us to a total of 32 official entries in the Touhou Project, and we could add many more fan-created games. So this video game series you probably never played, with its enormous fan following, also has substantially more games under its belt than most big video game franchises. And now all the fan creations make more sense, don't they? And now add in that Touhou was always deeply rooted in fan culture, releasing at a convention which was filled with creative minds that like to produce fan content. And there is another factor to its popularity. When Touhou 6 released in 2002, the internet as a platform for the masses was just getting started. A couple of years later, in 2005, YouTube saw the light of the virtual world, and 1 year later, Nico Nico Doga, basically a Japanese video website, was published, and both platforms would be swarmed with fan content and meme videos, both formats in which Touhou-related creations felt right at home. Years later, a friend of mine would show me the wrongly named Death Waltz, which in some weird way was the beginning of the story of this video. And now we've come full circle. But that's not how I actually started this episode. Do you remember how it began after the title card? With Megalovania and Undertale. Earlier I talked about how Megalovania's popularity is comparable to N Owen Was Her, but Undertale has more similarities to Touhou. It also gained a huge fan base that started to create all kinds of fan content. As I stated before, I don't want to spoil Undertale in any way, that's why I won't show anything here. Just know that I could easily create a section for its music, animation and fan games, similar to how I did for Touhou. Undertale inspired a lot of its fans to work on their own creations, and that's really wonderful. And you know what the best part is? Just like the Touhou Project, Undertale was mostly created by one person, Toby Fox, who is one of those dedicated fans that was inspired by Touhou. I leave this part of the story to him because he talked about it in a video message for the Indie Live Expo in 2020.
僕の心もインディーゲームをプレイして輝いたことがあります。洞窟物語とか、夢日記とか、そしてもちろん、ズンさんのTouhou Projectとか。そう、帽子をかぶった個性的な女の子たちや、綺麗に並んだ弾幕や、日本ならではのエネルジェティックビエンに触れて、僕の心が輝きました。聖なる光に飛び込んで、僕の体も進化を遂げた。そして僕はゲームデザイナーというモンスターになったんです。
Zun created the Touhou Project, put all his heart into it, and somehow Toby Fox came into contact with Zun's games and its fan culture, got inspired, and years later he published Undertale, his own passion project, which in turn inspired lots of its fans. And here are Toby Fox and Zun drinking beers together. Isn't that just the best? I guess that's the best story I'll ever tell on this channel. But who knows? Maybe one day Toby Fox will be drinking beers with another, younger indie developer that was inspired by his games. Man, I hope I live in a timeline where something like that happens. But yeah, that's more than enough reasons to try out a Touhou game for yourself. They are extremely beloved, are the passion project of one hero, and even Toby Fox likes them. So go play some Touhou. But before you do, I have some more things to say, because I also played a Touhou game and want to talk about it. In the end, that's the main point of my videos, and everything up to this point was just the introduction. Since my story with Touhou started with N Owen was her, I had to play the game it originates from. Touhou 6 Embodiment of Scarlet Devil. There was no debate or no further research, it had to be Touhou 6. Luckily, it's a good starting point since it is the first of the Windows era. It not only was way more accessible than its 5 predecessors, it also rebooted the story of the franchise. And it introduced the spell card system, but I'll save that for later. Let's start with the basics. As a Danmaku or bullet hell shooter, the gameplay revolves around flying through levels, shooting a lot of enemies and dodging bullets. The last part is way more important. While being in the right position to shoot your enemies is advantageous, the main focus of the game is on weaving through these projectiles without getting hit. In fact, you don't have to defeat any enemies. As long as you dodge all the bullets, you will get through the stages. Shooting enemies is just a way of reducing the amount of projectiles on screen. And that can save you, because every single hit kills you, lowering your amount of lives and bringing you one step closer to a game over. This emphasis on dodging is reinforced by an additional mechanic, the focus mode. It's activated by pressing and holding a button which dramatically slows down your character's movement. It lets you maneuver accurately to get through narrow patterns like this. I should mention that it alters the way you fire your shots by focusing them more in front of you, so there is also an offensive application. But most of the time you'll be using focus mode to precisely evade incoming threats. Since it slows you down, it's always a strategic decision, and often you're better off moving out of the way quickly. Using this mode correctly becomes one of the key skills, and in my experience I went through different phases. Using focus mode rarely, to using it all the time, to alternating between the modes a lot. Next to shooting and dodging, there's more you do in this game. Defeated enemies drop these red and blue items. The blue ones are for points, which can net you extra lives if you gather enough, and the red ones slowly power up your shot. You definitely want to collect as many as possible, because more lives are always great and the difference in firepower is really noticeable. However, they also introduce risk and reward to the formula, because you have to actively collect them by moving around. But enemies don't wait patiently for you to gather all of your resources. If you get too focused on the items, you might get surprised by a stray bullet. And more often than not, the suppressive nature of the bullet patterns prevent you from collecting anything. There is another way to get the point and power up items, and it gets unlocked as soon as you max out your firepower. When you move to the upper part of the screen, all the items come flying towards you, making the collection really easy. However, up there you are the most vulnerable, most enemies spawn at the top of the screen. You usually feel much safer at the bottom, where you have a lot of time to react, which transforms this auto-collect to a meaningful decision. Do you want to play it safe and stay at the bottom of the screen, only collecting the items that are close to you? Or do you take the risk going to the top to gather more points and possibly gaining an extra life in the process? Pretty clever if you ask me. And there is another strategic element to the core gameplay, the bombs. You can activate them with a button press, which deals a huge amount of damage but also clears the screen of all bullets, creating lots of safe space for you. The latter one is the more important function, because if used correctly, a bomb can act as a get out of jail card, even preventing a certain death. Since they are so powerful, you can't use them all the time, instead you get 3 bombs per life, so there is some resource management involved. You don't want to waste them for no reason, but you also don't want to die if you could have prevented it with a bomb. Finding the correct time to use them is a skill in itself, and there is even an advanced technique called the death bomb, where you activate one in the frames after you have been hit, which keeps you alive. But don't think you can do that on reaction. Your death might be accompanied by a clearly distinguished sound effect, but the window for a death bomb is just 6 frames, which translates to 0.1 seconds. That's not reactable for a human being, so instead you need to correctly analyze your situation and foretell a death. You probably noticed that I showed you different types of bombs. That's because you either play as Reimu or Marisa, and they come with 2 different loadouts each, meaning you choose between 4 playstyles and they bring some variety. In example, the first Reimu loadout, Reimu A, is very beginner friendly. It has a homing projectile that chases enemies, and her bomb Fantasy Seal clears the screen for a long time, so it's best used defensively to survive hard patterns. Her weakness is that she doesn't deal much damage. In contrast, Reimu B can kill enemies way faster, but her persuasion needles shoot straight up, so you actually have to aim and position yourself accordingly. And her bomb is the weakest of the game, lasting only a short amount of time and dealing little damage. The second character, Marisa, moves faster than Reimu, which has its pros and cons. It is harder to control and you might accidentally overshoot and hit bullets, but her increased speed allows her more ways of dodging. Marisa A has these exploding missiles, but I prefer Marisa B with her lasers and the strongest bomb in the game. Master Spark lasts very long, and when you detonate it while your lasers are active, you deal ridiculous amounts of damage. These were the basics, but they don't really describe the feeling of playing one of these games. This core gameplay is fun, but it's just one of the 4 main reasons why Touhou 6 feels so addictive. Another is how it handles its difficulty. If you couldn't tell, Touhou 6 is really hard, and when the screen gets swarmed by projectiles, you can lose your lives very quickly. Interestingly, the game documents that with another risk and reward mechanic. It's called Grace, and you can see its number on your status screen on the right. It increases whenever a bullet comes dangerously close towards your hitbox. By the way, the sprite of your character is quite big, but you only get hit if a bullet touches this small dot right here. And if it comes close, your grace counter increases, which nets you additional points. And points can get you more extra lives, so you have an incentive to get into more danger, grace as much as possible and earn more points. This whole risk and reward package with collecting the items, saving your bombs and the grace system, it's so clever. But it also shows how often you were close of getting hit. In this playthrough, the counter reached 107 at the end of stage 2, which means there were 107 situations that could have led to a death, just in stage 2 alone. And when we look at the longest stage, number 4, we see more than double the amount. So you really have to master dodging if you want to succeed. This difficulty is intentional. You could even say it is an essential part of a Touhou game. In 2007, Sun criticized the video game industry for reducing the complexity and difficulty of their games to attract larger audiences. He instead embraced the challenge and the elegance of designing difficult games, and Touhou 6 was an attempt to keep this philosophy and the Danmaku genre alive. He obviously succeeded. And while it is extremely difficult, it's never unfair. Bullet patterns are not random, but follow a clear, well, pattern. Some of them fly in a predefined direction, others target you directly, and different forms or types of projectiles add more variety to the mix. The screen looks chaotic, but there is always a method to the chaos. Or at least most of the time, because there are also some random elements to mix it up. But the main takeaway is, you can learn how the enemies attack you, how the stages and bosses work, and prepare yourself accordingly. The execution is still hard, but it never feels impossible. And that's another secret ingredient of this game. It is always on the edge of what is manageable, but never in the realm of the impossible. Yes, there were 262 times where I almost died in stage 4, but all of them were prevented. Your hitbox is tiny and you can avoid every death by just moving out of the way. And you even have your bombs to get you out of tricky situations. Whenever I died, it felt like my mistake and not the game being unfair. Combine that magical sweet spot in difficulty with a solid and simple core gameplay, and also with the great music, we shouldn't forget that, and you get a gameplay experience that invites you to achieve a flow-like state. While the first level is merely a warm-up to ease you in the second it becomes impossible to react to every single bullet, and instead you start to perceive whole patterns. You have to concentrate 100% on the game, and in this state, time seems to move slower. You develop a sense on how to avoid danger, and that feeling of somehow surviving these impossible situations and seeing a method in all this chaos, that flow is the main appeal of Touhou. That keeps you coming back and even starts getting addictive. After you learn the basics, you'll quickly get into a just one more try mentality. And to learn the basics, the game offers an easy mode. If you are new to Danmaku games, you should definitely start here. The game wants you to move on to normal as quickly as possible, which is evident by the fact that you are only allowed to play 5 of the 6 levels in easy. Nevertheless, easy is the best way to start out. And once you are good enough, the game clearly communicates your goal if you want to truly beat it. The infamous 1cc, 1 continue clear. While playing on any difficulty, the game offers you 3 continues, so you can run out of lives multiple times before getting a game over. Beating the game on normal with these conditions is not too hard. But clearing it in 1 continue, meaning in 5 lives, that's a completely different story. 5 lives is not that much, and suddenly gaining extra lives and cleverly using your bombs becomes even more important. When I read this message for the first time, I was thinking that's absolutely impossible. But in my heart I knew that nothing in this game is impossible. It's just on the edge of it. And if you think about it, with each life you get 3 bombs. If used correctly, you can avoid 3 deadly situations with them before actually dying. So each life can be worth 4 deaths. And if you take extra lives into account, you suddenly have around 40 deadly situations before you actually game over. And that sounds much more manageable. Still not easy, after all in stage 4 I could have died 262 times, but certainly not impossible. The catch is that you will often find yourself using bombs out of panic, or, and that's even worse, dying with bombs left. But if you stick to it, you will get better and better, and you'll last longer until you have to use your continue. And for me, a couple of weeks later and after an uncountable amount of tries, I finally beat Touhou 6 on normal without using a continue. That felt so awesome. It's one of the best feelings I had in gaming this year. Man, even now I get goosebumps while watching this footage. It was a great journey, and seeing your growth and lasting longer on your 1 continue, I totally get what Sun meant with difficulty and complexity in gaming, because this right here is just the best. But while I am totally a guy who loves his challenging games, there was another factor that kept me coming back. Next to the clever difficulty, the flow state and the cool music, there is a 4th aspect that makes this game great. It's the characters. I really like these characters. I would even go so far saying that I feel strong emotions towards them. In a way, they are the real highlight of this game, not the music, not the difficulty, but these girls. How, you might ask? Well, let's do a little excursion here. What makes a good character in a video game? That topic is too big for this video. Let's instead look at how games can present their characters. Check out these guys. They have a striking design and their facial expressions and posture already convey so much, but when they start talking it gets even more intense. Their voice actors did a fantastic job, and what they are saying is also quite impactful. So we have the full package here. Character design, animations, voice acting, dialogue, and these are just the first impressions. In a long story-driven game, you encounter characters like these several times, and the way they are presented shapes your image of them, as well as their actions and dialogue. Over time, they build a relationship towards the player, and towards other characters. They might even develop and change their characteristics. And in Touhou 6, there is nothing of that. Nothing is a bit hyperbolic, but nothing remarkable. Yes, there is some dialogue before boss fights, but it's just banter. The characters do have animations, but yeah. And there is no voice acting, no real character development, none of the bosses interact with anybody else, and their designs... well, I like them, but most of them are not outstanding enough to make them popular outside of their games. So in terms of presentation, there is almost nothing here. But these girls excel at one thing. It's how they are characterized during their fights. You might not learn much from their dialogue and animations, but everything you need to know is right here in these boss fights. Which might sound absurd, because all they're doing is spouting out these bullets. Let's make one thing clear here. The bosses are the highlight of Touhou. While the stages offer lots of variation, the really impressive bullet patterns are mostly tied to bosses. Also, instead of swarms of enemies, you now have another humanoid enemy facing you at the top of the screen, which make it feel like a duel. This is more emphasized by the life bar each boss has, that lets you see how far you progressed. This number right here shows you how many extra lives the boss has, so in this case you have to reduce the boss's health bar 3 times. Alternatively, you could wait until the shown time runs out, which also reduces the lives of a boss, but in most cases it's easier to deal the damage. Because of this setup, the fights feel much more personal than the stages, but so far we haven't really reached a level that could be called characterization. So let's make a deep dive, and the best example is Remilia Scarlet, the final boss herself. Let's analyze her bullet patterns. In her first of 5 lives, she sends out this wave of different sized projectiles, which clearly communicates that she is not playing around. She is the final challenge, and this is the first taste of her power. But if you manage to get through this, something interesting happens. This is called a spell card. When a boss has lost a majority of its health, they usually change their attack pattern. This is not exclusive to Remilia. Every boss has a couple of spell cards which represent their signature moves. When you see an effect like this, you know that the boss is getting serious, and the bullet pattern that follow are generally much more complicated or gimmicky. This creates some back and forth that reminds me of fights in movies or animes. They start out with their normal attacks, but at some point they use their special powers. And you can join in, because your bombs are also spell cards. With that, the fight escalates more and more until you finally reach the full power of your opponent. And in Remilia's case, her first spell card already looks like her final form. These thick lasers cover most of the screen, so you have almost no space to maneuver. This is a pure display of power, but it also shows that Remilia wants to have control over you, which is a reoccurring theme in this fight. Look at her second spell card. Every bullet is neatly organized, nothing is out of line, and you are left to wonder how you could possibly get through that, which I usually fail. And her third spell card, which is called... where have I heard that name before? Anyway, the way she spreads these red bullets and then makes them move over the screen, it is so beautiful. I know it's there to kill me, but there's certainly some elegance in this pattern. And even though there is so much going on, every bullet follows a higher order. And that's Remilia Scarlet in a nutshell. Immensely powerful, but always in control. This whole fight feels like an uphill battle. You are never on her level, because all her patterns are so perfectly executed, every little bullet has a clear purpose. And if you manage to survive one phase, she already has the next one in store, which tries to control you in a different way. I respect that. She killed me many times during my one continue clear attempts, but I was never angry or disappointed because of that. I was just not good enough to face her yet. Which is a weird feeling for a difficult fight like hers. I don't know what it is, maybe it's the magnificence of her patterns, maybe it's her music, or just the fact that she always looks so calm when summoning a spell card. But I don't feel any hostility towards her, just a deep respect. All of this culminates in her final spell card, another display of her power and her ability to control the movement of many bullets. This right here is the final stretch, and whenever I made it here in one continue, my heart was racing. If you need a final proof of her power, if you use one of your spell cards here, she turns into a bat, rendering her immune to all damage until the bomb is over. As I said before, you are never on her level. At this point you might be thinking, he just described a good final boss, there was nothing special here. How is that characterization? And to answer that, I want to contrast Remelia with other bosses. For example, the first one, the Yokai Rumia. This fight is much easier, of course, but it doesn't even feel like a fight until the end. Rumia's gimmick is that she has a couple of attack patterns that she shoots out randomly. None of them are really threatening, but you can't really predict what's coming next. In 2 of her 4 phases, her attacks are chosen randomly. Only her spell cards follow a set pattern. And the first one is these waves of bullets, which... well, it's not really dangerous. She's just sending them out and not really aiming at you or anything. She's basically just playing around. And that's this whole fight. There are no real stakes here, instead it's a playful encounter. Rumia doesn't really want to kill you, she just wants to have some fun. In the final spell card you can see her getting a bit serious. It is much more challenging than anything she has shown you so far. It is a game, but she still wants to win, which is evident by these aimed bullet waves. And so this playful encounter ends with a bit of tension, but in the end Rumia was just a playful obstacle, not a real enemy. Which is an extreme contrast to the second boss, Ice Fairy Cerno. Look how she begins her fight. She wants to get you, there's no playing around here. And she follows it up with another attack pattern before quickly repeating the shotgun blasts. So her intentions are clear from the start. And her first spell card is low-key one of the hardest in the game. It consists of these curtains of icicles that are closing in and these big bullets in the center. This is some Remelia Scarlet level of control Cherno is showing here. When the icicles converge, it can get extremely tough to not get hit. And even if you survive that, later on she has another impressive spell card in store. She freezes the bullets and starts to control them, similar to the final boss. Or at least it would be if it didn't have clear openings. This freeze and control attack would be absolutely deadly if it wasn't divided into separate steps. You first have to dodge these bullets, then she shoots out the blue ones that are not even aimed and can miss you even if you don't move, and then she starts moving around the frozen bullets. It is a high level strategy, but she is not able to execute it all at once, and so it's easy to dodge. And in the spell card earlier, Cerno is not able to keep attacking constantly, which creates this clear opening that lets you move through the curtain of ice. So she is using top tier patterns, but is not powerful enough to properly perform them. It is kinda the opposite to Remelia Scarlet. Kirno is not on your level. She might be your second boss, but for her, you are her final boss. And so she is giving her all, but it is not enough. This is perfectly exemplified by her final spell card, where she has clearly run out of ideas and is desperately shooting out ice. Chiruno is just doing her best. She is the underdog of this story, and that's why I really enjoy fighting her. And when she does manage to kill me, I'm somehow happy for her. But above all else, she is immensely aggressive, which cannot be said about boss number 3. Hong Mei Ling is the gatekeeper and gardener of Remelia Scarlet's mansion, and just by looking at some of her patterns you can see which of these roles she prefers. Mei Ling has probably the most beautiful patterns in the game, and that's basically her whole deal. She is seeking beauty and she wants to tend her garden. The fight against you is not really important to her. You fight Mei Ling 2 times, spanning a total of 8 phases, and in none of them she attacks you directly. She is not easy because she fills the screen with many bullets, but none of them are targeted at you. She is always creating beautiful images, but never really fighting you. In one phase, a bunch of normal enemies come in to support her and they shoot straight at you. This is the only time this happens, no other boss gets helped by normal enemies. Meaning Mei Ling is comparable to the first boss. But while Rumia wanted to play by fighting you, Mei Ling wants to impress you with her beautiful patterns. And that makes her fight quite special. Next up we have Patchouli Knowledge, and if you couldn't tell by the name or her design, she is really smart, and that dictates her fight. She starts out with these lasers that force you to move around. Then she shoots out some bullets to fill the screen before repeating the lasers. And this right here is the moment that kills you. The lasers force you to cross the path of these bullets and you have to somehow avoid both. This is Patchouli's basic strategy. Combine two types of bullets, make you face them both at the same time and checkmate. She is all about preparing these deadly situations in which you have to face multiple threats. This strategy is also present in her theming. She is using magic to summon the 5 elements, and in her later spell cards she always summons 2 elements at once, leading to similar situations like with the lasers. You have to keep track of 2 types of bullets, and the moments where you have to dodge both are the most dangerous. This is how she gets you. It feels like she wants to outsmart you, and analyzing the pattern correctly is more important than quick reflexes. But she has another advantage that makes her the smartest opponent. She is the only boss that adapts her strategy based on which character and which loadout you chose. So with each loadout you will face different spell cards that use different elements. All in all, Patchouli is somehow infamous and is often labeled as the gimmick boss of Touhou 6. And there you have it, a diverse set of characters with fights that feel really different. The playful encounter in the beginning is followed by the aggressive battle with the Ice Fairy, we have a slightly narcissistic flower lover followed by a strategic chess player, and at the end we face the elegant and all-controlling Remelia Scarlet. That's a lot of character traits considering I derived them from the boss fights alone. And keep in mind that you face them over and over again if you are going for a one continue clear. And with each encounter, these quirks and traits become more apparent. In your first run you will just focus on dodging bullets, but over time you will see these overarching themes in the fights, and that's when these small sprites start to become characters. And before you know it, you will feel some kind of emotion towards them. Maybe you will be amused by Rumia's playfulness, be amazed or annoyed by Mei Ling's lovely patterns, or appreciate when Patchouli creates another of these checkmate situations. And if you are not convinced yet, then don't worry, because there is still her. I hate Sakuya Izayoi. She is the ultimate run killer. While Remelia Scarlet is more powerful, Sakuya is the one that decides if I even get a serious attempt at beating the final boss, because she is out to kill you. You fight her 3 times, she's the mid-boss and actual boss of stage 5 and the mid-boss of stage 6, because she will not stop until she ruined your run. When you face her for the last time, she even has the audacity to tell you that she is only here to make you waste a bomb. And whenever you game over, look who is smirking at you. Oh, how much I hate her. And I will explain why. She will do everything to kill you, or in other words, she is cheating. In the first encounter, Sakuya introduces the 2 main ways she uses projectiles. She throws out these fans of knives that travel slowly over the screen but get wider the farther they go. At some point they basically become walls of death closing in. By themselves they are easy to dodge, but Sakuya also uses these big daggers that move much faster. And even in this first phase you can already see where this is going. She's trying to trap you in between the slow moving walls and the big daggers. This gets much more profound during her main boss fight. We have the walls of death and the fast moving daggers, but this time it gets even harder to not get trapped. And later on you see the evolved form of this strategy. This can lead to situations in which you are hopelessly trapped with no way out. If you have a bomb left, you have to use it, otherwise you just wait for your death, which is a really frustrating feeling. You cannot do anything to avoid it now, instead you should have seen this trap coming long before it happened. But how if there is so much going on? You basically have to predict the future of this messy screen and make sure you don't maneuver yourself to death. When you are on a good run, this can get infuriating, but we haven't even seen a spell card of her. First, she sends out this explosion of random bullets, which is not too extreme. But then she stops time, summons hundreds of daggers, and then you have to dodge all of that at once. The daggers themselves are mostly directed towards you, but the initial explosion of blue bullets is still out there, and keeping track of them while dodging all the daggers, good luck with that. Stopping time and spawning new projectiles. Can we call that cheating? If not, then wait for her second spell card. At first it looks similar to the last one, however after placing the blue knives that target you, she then turns some of them green, which points them in a random direction, and then she unfreezes time. And if that's not chaotic enough for you, here's her third spell card in which she throws out a lot of knives, stops time and turns some of them green so they turn into random directions. This is so hard to dodge. And you know what? When she repeats the process, some of the green knives from the first wave will still be on screen, meaning she can turn them around again while the time is frozen. Okay, I haven't researched the Geneva Convention before writing the script, but I'm pretty sure that freezing time and turning around a knife you already dodged so it flies back at you and stabs you in the back, that has to be considered a war crime. And that's what Sakuya is. A criminal who steals your heart-protected lives and bombs. She is the cause of many lost runs, of frustration, anger and hatred. But like everything else in this game, her patterns are not impossible, but she is the closest of being unfair. Since you see the time stop and the spawning of the knives, you have some time to get yourself prepared, and that's what makes it manageable. Even situations like these are still not impossible, but Sakuya really pushes you towards the edge of that term. On the other hand, with all this hatred involved, it feels really rewarding beating her without losing too many lives. And in her final spell card, seconds before facing Remilia Scarlet, Sakuya herself gets frustrated, forgets to use all her tricks, and just desperately shoots out bullets. On a good run, this is your catharsis for enduring all of her other phases. She is completely defeated, has nothing left to stop you, and you really earned your fight with the final boss. So you could argue that there is even some character development in these fights. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but for me, all of this is amazing. These boss fights are so much more than just bullet patterns. They are little stories about characters and how they are fighting you. It is not told through cutscenes or dialogue, but by game design, by the fights themselves, and that leaves a lasting impression. I began Touhou 6 out of curiosity, got into it because of the music, the tight gameplay and the addictive difficulty, but what really kept me going were these boss fights. They are so much fun, and that's why I had to make this lengthy video. If you made it to this point, thank you for watching. If you want to dig deeper into Touhou fan culture, I have two recommendations for you. At the beginning of this year, I knew almost nothing about this stuff, so I had to look up a lot of sources, and the channel Espray FM provided plenty information. As well as this video from Nyanachi about Touhou anime productions. Believe me, I only scratched the surface here, there is so much more to find out, so give them a watch if you are interested. And if you want to get a second opinion on Touhou 6, here is another analysis of the game. Shruby has a video that is much more focused and mentions topics that were not relevant in my video, like
the stages themselves are designed with the music in mind, so that certain events happen in sync with the music.
Combining game design and music, that sounds interesting. The only thing left now is placing Touhou 6 in my personal ranking, and you will probably not be surprised by the result. Touhou 6 was refreshing for me, and even though this video got much longer than originally intended, working on it was a fun ride. I got lots of energy out of it. Enough so I can finally face the demon that has been haunting me from the beginning. In the next episode I will face it and lay this topic to rest once and for all. It will be about open fields, a giant tree, and the waterfall dance. Until then. Wait, where was N Owen was her?